Welcome, restless dreamer. You've just stepped into the shadows of sleep, where stories whisper and the darkness listens. I'm your guide tonight, your voice in the void, here to lead you gently into nightmares wrapped in lullabies. Before we begin, press like if you're brave enough, and subscribe for more midnight tales that blur the line between sleep and terror. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from, and what hour has found you?
I never thought I'd get desperate enough to take inspiration from a toy, but after 3 months of staring at blank pages and half-finished drawings, my sketchbook might as well have been a tomb. The faces I drew looked stiff, the shadows lifeless. My agent had stopped asking when I'd be sending anything new. That's when I saw it, at a flea market, tucked between a stack of yellowed comic books and a box of mismatched doll heads. The Labubu doll was odd. Its eyes were too big, glossy black marbles with flecks of amber buried deep inside. Its grin stretched wider than felt comfortable, with sharp, cartoonish teeth painted in perfect white. The fur was a soft shade of beige, matted slightly, but it wore a little striped shirt that looked brand new. I picked it up. It felt heavier than it should have, solid, as if something inside was weighing it down. "You draw?" The voice came from the stall's owner, a woman so pale she looked carved from wax. Her eyes didn't meet mine. "Sometimes," I said. She smiled without warmth. "Draw it true, and it will show you what's hidden." I thought it was just the kind of cryptic nonsense flea market people say to make their junk sound mysterious. I handed over $10 and brought it home. That night, I set the Labubu on my desk. My apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of the fridge and the occasional car passing outside. I sharpened a pencil, flipped to a fresh page in my sketchbook, and started. The first drawing came easy. The doll sat perfectly still, head tilted just slightly to the left. I caught the way the fur stuck out around its ears, the delicate curve of its claws. When I was done, I felt something I hadn't in months: satisfaction. One sketch turned into a nightly ritual. I'd pour a glass of wine, set the Labubu on my desk, and draw it for an hour or so before bed. Each night I tried different angles, different lighting. The work felt meditative. The doll's grin seemed to coax the lines out of me. By the 4th night, I noticed something odd. I'd been drawing the Labubu from the front, and in my latest sketch, a faint crack appeared just beneath its right eye. In reality, the fur was smooth, no sign of damage. I told myself it was a mistake in shading, but the next night there were smudges on its paws in the drawing. Dirt smudges. I picked up the doll and turned it over in my hands. Nothing. Clean as ever. I laughed it off. Maybe my subconscious was just adding texture. But over the next week, the changes grew harder to ignore. Rips appeared in the sketches, fraying along the shirt's edges. Stains, dark, rust-colored, bloomed across its fabric. One drawing showed the doll's fur matted and damp, as though it had been left in the rain. I started waking up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced something had been watching me. Once I was sure I'd left the doll on my desk, but in the morning, it was on my nightstand, facing me. The dreams started soon after. I'd find myself in a wooded place, the ground soft with damp leaves. The air smelled of soil and something metallic. I'd hear muffled laughter, light but distant. Sometimes I'd see flashes, tree roots twisting in the dark, something pale buried between them. I tried to stop drawing it, but each time I sat down with a blank page, my hand moved on its own, sketching that wide grin and glassy eyes. One night, everything changed. I was halfway through the drawing when I realized the background behind the Labubu wasn't my desk anymore. It was a clearing, grass half dead, a rusted swing set leaning on its side. The details came without thought. The crooked fence, the split tree trunk, the dirt patch near the center. My stomach dropped. I knew that place. It was the field behind my childhood home, a place I hadn't thought about in years. When I was 10, a boy from our neighborhood, Jamie, went missing. The last time anyone saw him, he was playing in that field. My parents kept me inside for weeks after. Police combed the area, but they found nothing. Eventually, the search stopped. I stared at the sketch, my pencil frozen in midair. The doll's paws in the drawing were smeared with dirt. Its eyes seemed brighter. The next night's sketch made me feel cold all over. The Labubu was still in that clearing, but now it was half buried in the dirt, only its head and one arm visible above the soil. Twisted roots curled around it like claws. The rust-colored stains were thicker, darker. I slammed the sketchbook shut. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in bed, staring at the doll where it sat on my desk. Its grin seemed wider in the dim light. I thought about the stall owner's words, "Draw it true, and it will show you what's hidden." By morning, I'd made up my mind. I drove back to my hometown, the Labubu wrapped in a towel in the passenger seat. It was close to midnight when I parked on the street behind my old house. The field was still there, though the fence had collapsed in places. The swing set leaned at the same crooked angle I remembered. Weeds grew waist-high. I climbed over the fence, my flashlight beam cutting through the dark. The air smelled damp and faintly rotten. Using the sketch as a guide, I found the exact spot, the split tree trunk, the bare patch of dirt between the roots. I dropped to my knees and began digging with my hands. The soil was cold, wet, and clung to my skin. My breath fogged in the air. I dug until my nails tore and my fingers went numb. Then my hand struck something solid. I pulled it free. It was a Labubu doll, but not mine. This one was filthy, its fur stiff with mud. A deep crack split the face beneath one eye. Its shirt hung in tatters. Something small fell from the folds of the shirt, a scrap of faded blue fabric. I froze. I remembered that shirt. Jamie wore it the day he disappeared. My chest felt tight. I wanted to throw the doll and run, but my body wouldn't move. From somewhere behind me came a soft, high giggle. I turned. My Labubu, the one I'd bought from the flea market, sat upright in the grass a few feet away. Its head tilted, eyes gleaming in my flashlight beam. I blinked. In that moment, the giggle seemed to come from both the trees and inside my head. The next thing I remember is stumbling back to my car, my hands empty, the field silent behind me. I haven't drawn since that night. I keep the sketchbook locked in a drawer, though sometimes I swear I hear the sound of a pencil scratching inside. The Labubu I bought is gone, but sometimes, when I walk past the park near my apartment, I catch a glimpse of something small sitting in the grass, always watching, always smiling. The first time I saw it, I almost didn't pick it up. It was sitting on a low shelf in the thrift shop, surrounded by chipped teacups and mismatched salt shakers. A Labubu doll, about a foot tall, wearing a faded orange jumper, its fur worn down in places. The stitching around its mouth had come loose at one corner, giving it an odd, almost smug expression. I'm not really a doll collector, but I like strange old tech, and something about this one made me pause. The left eye was just like any other glass doll eye, glossy, perfectly round, reflecting the dim shop light. But the right caught the light differently. I bent down, squinting. Beneath the glass surface, I could see a tiny black circle, too perfect, too deliberate. It looked exactly like the lens of an old spy camera. $5, the shopkeeper said when I asked. Creepy little thing, isn't it? I bought it. At home, I set it on my desk and grabbed my toolkit. The glass eye was held in place by old glue that crumbled away easily. Behind it, sure enough, was a tiny, outdated camera lens. A couple of frayed wires connected it to a small metal module embedded inside the head. The weird part? There was no power source, no battery compartment, no slot for a cable. I'd seen my share of vintage tech, Cold War bugs, novelty gadgets, even failed prototypes, but this made no sense. Without power, it couldn't record, let alone transmit. I took a few pictures and posted them on a vintage electronics forum. Responses came fast. Looks like a novelty spy toy. That transmitter is 70s era.
Shouldn't even work anymore. Burn it. I laughed at that last one. Internet dramatics. I left the doll on the armchair in the living room, planning to take better photos tomorrow, and went to bed. The static woke me. At first I thought it was just rain on the window, but the air was still. I got up, followed the sound, and found the TV on in the living room. I hadn't turned it on. The screen showed grainy, black and white footage. Not a movie, not a channel I recognized. It was my living room. The exact angle matched where I'd left the Labubu earlier. I looked at the chair. It was empty. I stood there, staring at the screen, my heart in my throat. The feed was still. No movement, just the silent frame of the room. Then, in a sudden burst of static, the picture collapsed into snow. I switched the TV off. The armchair remained empty. I didn't sleep much after that. The next day, I tried to rationalize. Maybe I'd knocked the doll onto the floor and just didn't see it. Maybe the TV had glitched and pulled up some unrelated feed. I searched the living room. No doll. Not under the chair. Not behind the couch. Nowhere. That night, I was at my desk when my phone lit up. The camera app was open. I hadn't touched it. The screen showed that same grainy feed again. The living room, the armchair, that exact angle. I slammed the phone face down and grabbed it again. The app was closed, like nothing had happened. Half an hour later, my laptop booted up on its own. The webcam light blinked. The feed was there again. The Labubu was still missing. By the third night, I'd given up on pretending it was nothing. It started at 1:13 a.m. First the TV, then the phone, then the laptop, then even my old handheld game console in the drawer. Every screen showed the exact same image. The living room, the armchair. Only now, in the feed, something stood in the far left corner of the room. A shape, tall, unfocused, almost human but blurred, like the static itself was clinging to it. I backed away from the screens, but the feed stayed on. The shape didn't move, until it did. A single step forward. I pulled the plug on the TV, turned off the phone, yanked the laptop's battery. The screens went black. I didn't sleep. The next morning I found the Labubu sitting back on the armchair. I don't remember putting it there. I don't remember touching it at all. The lens was still missing from its right eye, just a dark hollow in the socket. I snapped. I grabbed it by the head, slammed it down on the kitchen counter, and tore the seams open with a kitchen knife. Stuffing spilled out. Black, lumpy, faintly damp. I dug my fingers inside, searching for wires, transmitters, anything. There was nothing. No lens, no electronics, just stuffing. The moment I dropped the last clump on the counter, every device in the apartment went dark. I bagged the doll, ran outside, and threw it into the dumpster. For the first time in days, the air in the apartment felt still. That night, I let myself relax. I even turned the TV back on to watch something mindless, just to prove the paranoia was over. Halfway through the show, the screen flickered. Snow. Then, the grainy feed. The armchair again. Empty. The camera panned, slow and deliberate. Not static anymore. Not fixed. Moving. It was behind me. Before I could turn, the screen went black, and in the sudden dark of the living room I heard footsteps. Slow, heavy, coming from the hallway. The salt in the air was always the first thing Hannah noticed when she stepped outside. The coastal town wasn't large, just a tangle of weather-worn houses along narrow streets, framed by the dull gleam of the sea. She had moved into her new apartment a week ago, the smallest one in a 3-story building that tilted just slightly to the left, like an old man with a crooked back. The rooms were bare, a couch rescued from a thrift store, a table that wobbled, and 2 mismatched chairs. She told herself she'd decorate over time, but for now, the place felt hollow. It was Mrs. Ellery who offered her something to fill the emptiness. Hannah had met her the day she moved in, a bird-boned woman with cloud-white hair and a smile that didn't quite reach her pale eyes. That afternoon, Mrs. Ellery knocked on Hannah's door, carrying a cardboard box. "Some odds and ends," she said, "might warm the place up." Inside were old picture frames, a chipped porcelain mug, and a doll. It was small, stitched, with a fox-like grin and glassy eyes that caught the light strangely. Its faded orange body was worn smooth at the seams, as if handled for years. "Labubu," Mrs. Ellery said fondly. "My granddaughter used to carry it everywhere. Just keep it for a while." Hannah hesitated, then smiled. "Thanks. I'll make sure it's safe." The doll ended up on a shelf by the living room window. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the faint groan of the wind through the siding, she thought she heard a small, almost polite knock. Not at the door, but inside the wall near her headboard. She told herself it was the building settling. By midweek, she noticed the Labubu was rarely where she'd left it. She'd place it on the shelf, only to find it sitting on the couch when she returned from work. She assumed she'd forgotten moving it. Maybe she'd knocked it off while opening the window. Maybe she'd set it down while dusting. The explanations felt thin. Thursday night, she was at her desk editing photos when the streetlight outside flickered. She glanced toward the window and froze. The doll was now turned toward her, its glass eyes catching the pale light. She hadn't heard it fall. She hadn't touched it. She picked it up, its fabric faintly warm in her hands, and put it back. At 3:14 a.m., she woke with a start. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. The Labubu was sitting on her nightstand. The next morning she tried to laugh it off, telling herself she'd been half asleep, dreaming. But a part of her, the same part that had gone cold when she first touched the doll, didn't believe that. That night, she locked it in the hallway closet before going to bed. She even pushed a chair against the door, more for reassurance than security. When she woke, the chair was still in place, but the closet door stood slightly ajar. The Labubu was back on the shelf. Hannah sat on the couch for a long time staring at it. She thought she heard faint tapping from inside the wall again. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, in a rhythm that seemed deliberate. She decided to return it. Mrs. Ellery opened her door after the first knock. Her smile faltered when she saw the doll in Hannah's hands. "Oh," she said quietly. I thought it wouldn't go to someone in this building again." "What do you mean?" Hannah asked. Mrs. Ellery hesitated, then shook her head. "You wouldn't believe me. Try me." Her voice lowered. "I've given that doll away before. Every time it comes back, people say it moves when no one's looking. Things go missing. You hear things. My granddaughter didn't make it to 10 years old, and for months afterward, I thought I heard her voice in the night. I stopped keeping the doll after that." The words left a chill on Hannah's skin. "So you're giving it to me?" "I don't want it," Mrs. Ellery said, "but it doesn't seem to give me a choice." That night, Hannah set her phone to record in the living room. She placed the doll in front of the camera, switched off the lights, and went to bed. In the early hours, a faint scraping sound woke her. It came from the living room, slow, dragging. She lay still, telling herself she wouldn't look. The sound stopped. The air felt heavier. In the morning, she checked the footage. At 2:46 a.m., the doll shifted slightly to the left. The movement was jerky, unnatural, like frames missing from a film reel. At 2:49, it turned toward the camera. Hannah shut the laptop and pushed it away. Over the next few nights, the disturbances escalated. Shadows seemed to dart across her peripheral vision. The air would drop in temperature, just enough for her breath to fog faintly. Sometimes she'd catch a faint scent of seawater, briny, damp, even when the windows were closed. On the 6th night, she woke to a whisper near her ear. No words, just a hiss of breath, too close. Her lamp clicked on by itself, and in the corner of the room, the doll stood upright on the floor, leaning slightly forward as if mid-step. She told herself it couldn't stand like that. Its legs didn't bend properly, but she didn't move it until morning. Hannah decided to get rid of it. She drove 3 towns over, dropped it into a charity bin, and went home lighter. That night, the tapping returned, louder now, as though someone rapped on the wall with a knuckle. When she checked the living room the next morning, the doll was back on the shelf. Her throat went dry. The air in the apartment felt different, charged,
as though something unseen had crossed a threshold. Her sister, Rachel, came over at Hannah's request. They stayed in the living room, both trying to act casual, both glancing too often toward the shelf. At 2:40 a.m., the temperature plunged. A faint scratching came from the bathroom, growing louder until it sounded like nails raking tile. The lights flickered. The doll was gone. They found it in the bathroom, facing the mirror. In the reflection, the room behind them looked wrong. The angles sharper, the shadows thicker. Something moved in that darker reflection, a ripple like heat haze. Rachel stepped back. "Do you see that?" Before Hannah could answer, every door in the apartment slammed at once. The bathroom light died. Something brushed past her leg, small but heavy enough to leave the sensation of weight. Rachel grabbed her arm. "We need to go." But when they reached the front door, it wouldn't open. Behind them, faint laughter. Not a child's, but a sound layered and low, like many voices speaking just under hearing. The light returned. The door swung open easily. Hannah and Rachel didn't speak as they left. Neither noticed the doll sitting neatly on the couch until the door clicked shut behind them. I've worked the evening shift at Hollow's Curiosities for almost 2 years now, and I've always thought of the place as harmless. Sure, the dim lighting and cluttered shelves could give you the creeps if you were alone, but that's part of the store's charm. We sell everything from rusted pocket watches to porcelain dolls that look like they've been staring at the same corner for 100 years. Some of the furniture is beautiful, some of it unsettling, but it's all just stuff. At least, that's what I used to think. The Labubu sat in a glass display case just to the right of the register. About a foot tall, dressed in a frayed red jumper, its fur was matted and its stitched smile curled in a way that seemed more like a smirk than anything playful. Glassy eyes reflected just enough light to make them glint when you weren't expecting it. It had been there since before I started working. It never sold, never moved. Sometimes customers would comment on it. Weird little thing. But no one ever bought it. I'd grown used to its presence. Until the ticking. It was a Tuesday evening, slow like most weekdays. I was dusting a shelf of old cameras when I heard it. Tick, tick, tick. Not loud, not fast, just steady, deliberate. I figured it was one of the wind-up clocks we had in the store, so I moved along the shelves, ear tilted toward each one, but every clock I checked was either silent or ticking out of sync with the sound I'd heard. The ticking seemed to come from behind me. I turned. The display case, the Labubu, was sitting there, same as always, but as I walked closer, the ticking grew clearer, coming from inside it. I laughed under my breath, shaking my head. Probably some kind of mechanical toy. I didn't know much about dolls, but it wasn't impossible that there was a tiny clockwork mechanism sewn inside. Still, something about the rhythm bothered me. It didn't sound like a toy's wind-up tick. It was slower, more patient. The next day I mentioned it to Marlene, who worked the morning shift. "Oh, that thing?" she said with a smirk. "Yeah, it's always done that. Creepy, huh? You mean you've heard it too?" "Sure. Don't think about it. Just one of those weird old things. Adds character to the store." Her casual tone made me feel stupid for even asking. I let it go. But that night, as I was sweeping the floor near closing time, I heard it again. Tick, tick, tick. Slower this time, almost syncing with my own heartbeat. I leaned close to the case, eyes level with the Labubu's stitched grin. The sound wasn't just ticking anymore. Beneath it, so faint I had to hold my breath to hear, there was something else. Breathing. 2 nights later, the storm rolled in. The wind howled against the windows, and rain slapped the glass like handfuls of gravel. The overhead lights flickered more than once, and I silently begged them not to go out. Around 9, I was at the register counting the till when I heard it. Tick, 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 and then soft whispers. I froze. At first I thought it might be the wind seeping through cracks in the building, but the sound was too close. I turned my head. The Labubu sat in its glass case,
head tilted slightly, as though it had been watching me all along. The whispers were coming from inside the display. I stood, walked toward it. My skin prickled as the words became clearer. Not that I could make them out entirely. They weren't in a rush. They slid between the ticks, curling and fading like cigarette smoke. I fumbled with the key to the case, my hands trembling. The glass door creaked open, and I reached in. The Labubu was warm. The ticking was louder now, the whispers sliding up into something almost conversational. And then it said my name, a soft, wet voice. I dropped it. It landed on the carpet with a muffled thud, and I stumbled back so fast I nearly tripped over a chair. I didn't bother locking the store. I just ran out into the rain, heart battering my ribs. The owner wasn't thrilled when I showed up late the next day, explaining why the shop had been left open, but I couldn't tell him the truth. The doll whispered my name. Doesn't exactly make you sound like a responsible employee. Still, I couldn't stop glancing at the case throughout the day. Every time I walked past, I swore its head was tilted at a slightly different angle. By closing, I'd made up my mind. I had to know what was inside. That night, I stayed late under the excuse of extra cleaning. The truth was, I wanted to face it, to prove to myself it wasn't real. I locked the front door, pulled the blinds, and sat on the stool by the counter, watching the case. For a long time, nothing happened. I started to feel foolish, then tick, tick, tick. The sound rolled through the room like it had been waiting for my attention. The whispers followed. This time the words were clearer. My name again. Then details. Things from my childhood I'd never told anyone. The name of my first pet. The smell of my grandmother's perfume. The night I woke at 6 years old to find my bedroom door wide open. Even though I'd locked it, my mouth went dry. It wasn't guessing. It knew. I grabbed the small knife I'd brought from the back room. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. I opened the display, yanked the doll out. Its glassy eyes reflected the dim light, and its grin seemed wider than before. The voice quickened, urgent now, pleading, laughing, sobbing, all tangled together. I pressed the blade to its fabric chest and sliced. The ticking stopped. The voice cut off mid-word, like someone had hit mute. Black stuffing spilled out, clumped and strangely damp. The smell that hit me was sour, metallic, and nestled deep inside the mess was a fragment of something white and hard. I picked it up. It was the jagged piece of a human tooth, stained yellow at the root. My stomach lurched. I dropped both the tooth and the stuffing into a trash bag, cinched it tight, and shoved it into the bin behind the counter. The Labubu lay on the counter, open and hollow. Just fabric now. I swept the floor, desperate to erase the whole scene from my mind. I was halfway to the door when I heard it. Tick. I froze. It had come from the trash bin. The store was dead quiet, but the tick came again, slower now. Tick, and then another. The rhythm matched my heartbeat exactly. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The trash bag shifted slightly, like something inside had turned over to get comfortable. The rain fell in a cold, steady drizzle, slicking the cracked pavement outside the Whitford Toy Company. The building's shell stood like a carcass beneath the steel-gray sky. Peeling paint curled like dry leaves. Boarded windows stared blank, and rusted metal beams creaked softly in the wind. The demolition crew's task was simple: strip the factory down, salvage what they could, and clear the rest. Mason, the youngest of the group, was midway through a cigarette when he noticed something strange. A heavy steel door recessed deep in the far storage wing. "Rick!" Mason called, voice echoing through the cavernous space. "You see this?" Rick, the foreman, lumbered over, hard hat pushed back. His eyes narrowed as he studied the door. "Blueprints don't show a room here. It's supposed to be a solid wall." "Well," Mason grinned, "either the blueprints are wrong or we just found a bonus." It took crowbars, a grinder, and more than 20 minutes before the lock finally gave. When the door swung open, A musty Swedish smell drifted out. Inside, rows of shelves stretched away. Hundreds of identical Labubu dolls sat frozen in eerie silence. Beige fabric bodies, cartoonish eyes stitched wide, fox-like grins stretched too far. Mason stepped inside, heart pounding. Looks like forgotten stock. Rick brushed dust from one doll, then froze. On a small table in the center sat another doll, similar in shape and grin, but its fur was coarse and tangled, like real hair. Creepy, Dylan muttered. Rick carefully bagged it. Someone'll pay good money for this. Mason carried the doll out, its grin watching the hallway fade behind them. 3 days later, the doll was in the hands of Warren Ellison, a local collector of oddities. His shop, Ellison's Curiosities, smelled of cedar and old varnish, a place full of dusty shelves and forgotten treasures. Warren specialized in rare toys and antiques, objects with history, and when Mason showed up with the Labubu doll, Warren didn't hesitate to double the asking price. "It's early Whitford," Warren said, running his fingers over the coarse threads. "Hand-sewn, too. This is a find." That night, just as the clock struck midnight, Warren was awoken by a soft thunk from the living room. He shuffled to the window, peered out. Empty street. He shook his head and returned inside. But when he glanced at the shelf, the doll wasn't there. It sat on the coffee table instead, its head tilted as if studying him. He told himself it had fallen and reset it carefully before returning to bed. The next morning, he found a smaller doll on the table, crude, ragged, stitched together with scraps of yarn and fabric. Its grin was wider, almost mocking. Warren searched his apartment, certain someone was playing a trick, but doors were locked and windows latched. He kept the new doll. By the end of the week, there were 6 smaller dolls scattered around Warren's apartment. Each morning, one would vanish without explanation, leaving only a faint trace of fabric or thread behind. Warren told himself it was some elaborate prank or a trick of his mind, but the unease grew heavier with each passing night. Then the neighborhood's quiet routine shattered. 7-year-old Kyle Brewer disappeared from his backyard. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing but the lingering whisper of a chill in the air. Warren barely noticed the news. His focus had narrowed to the dolls, how they multiplied, how they seemed almost alive, stitched together with a purpose he couldn't understand. One day, while dusting the original doll, Warren pricked his finger on a loose stitch. A tiny bead of blood welled up and soaked into the seam. That night, the original Labubu vanished from its usual spot. In its place were 2 new dolls, larger, more detailed than the smaller ones, with unsettlingly lifelike eyes. Warren caught himself staring at the seams, thinking he glimpsed something pale beneath the stitches. Another child vanished the next day. The town was on edge. Parents kept their children close. Playgrounds grew silent, and whispered rumors circled like smoke. Warren's apartment felt less like a home and more like a trap. Strange noises echoed. Scritch of tiny stitches in the walls, the floorboards, even beneath his bed. One night, unable to sleep, Warren sat in the dark living room, watching the shadows. At exactly 2:17 a.m., a faint rustling came from the corner. He watched, breath held, as the original doll, now slightly taller, dragged a bundle of fabric from the shadows. With impossible precision, the doll stitched the scraps together, slowly forming a new doll. As it stepped back, Warren caught a glimpse of something limp hidden within the bundle, something disturbingly small. His scream tore through the night, but when the lights flickered back on, the dolls had vanished. The next morning, a 3rd child was missing. Determined to end the nightmare, Warren gathered a metal trash bin, lighter fluid, and a box of matches. Tonight, he would burn the dolls, destroy whatever cursed magic clung to them. As he struck the first match, the apartment door creaked open. In filed dozens of dolls, tall ones, tiny ones, some barely formed, others nearly human-sized. Their stitched grins gleamed in the dim light. eyes fixed on Warren like predators sizing prey. The original stood at the front, head tilting slowly. In its button eyes, Warren thought he saw a child's face staring back at him. The match burned his fingers. He dropped it. The dolls swarmed. His scream was cut short. 2 days later, the police found no sign of Warren, only an empty living room, a faint smell of varnish, and one Labubu doll sitting neatly on the coffee table. Its grin was wider than ever. Spoiler-free summary: a demolition crew uncovers a locked storeroom filled with hundreds of identical Labubu dolls in an abandoned toy factory, including one sewn from human hair. When a local collector buys the doll, strange things begin. Every night, the doll reproduces smaller, rougher versions from scraps around the house. The smaller dolls vanish by morning, but soon children start disappearing in the neighborhood. As the dolls multiply and grow, the line between the natural and supernatural blurs, leaving the town gripped by fear and mystery. Rain slicked the streets into a patchwork of fractured light, neon signs shivering in the puddles. Claire pulled her coat tighter as she trudged up the cracked sidewalk, the wind biting at her damp cheeks. Her workday had been long, the kind of day that dragged every minute into an hour, and she wanted nothing more than a hot shower and silence. Her small, white-paneled house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, the porch light glowing weakly against the storm. But as she reached the steps, she saw it, a single brown cardboard box sitting dead center on the porch mat. It wasn't large, maybe the size of a shoebox, but the corners were darkened and soft from the rain. Thick black tape crisscrossed the seams in an oddly meticulous pattern, each strip perfectly aligned, as if applied with more care than such a box warranted. Her first thought was that it must have been delivered while she was at work, but when she crouched to read the label, her stomach gave a small, inexplicable twist. The return address was blank. No city, no street, not even a name. Just her own, typed in neat block letters. Claire W. No middle name, no last name fully spelled out, just the initial. A slip of yellowed paper was taped to the top, the edges curling slightly from the damp. The handwriting was in faded black ink, the letters narrow and sharp. Return to sender. Do not open at night. Claire frowned, glancing up at the street as if the sender might still be watching. The only movement came from the wind tossing the branches of the maple tree in her yard. She hadn't ordered anything. She touched the box, noting the strange density. It wasn't heavy exactly, but it felt compact, as if whatever was inside had been pressed tight into place. She gave it a small shake. Something soft shifted, followed by a faint, muffled thump. The sound prickled the back of her neck. She straightened, scanning the street again. No delivery truck, no cars, just the hiss of rain on asphalt. Claire carried it inside, setting it on the kitchen counter. The clock read 6:47 p.m., still technically daylight, though the rain clouds made it feel later. She looked at the note again. Probably a prank, or maybe the post office messed up and dropped it at the wrong address. She decided she'd take it to the post office in the morning. Claire left the box on the coffee table, trying to forget about it. She flicked on the TV, half listening to the low murmur of voices while she curled up on the couch. But every so often her gaze drifted toward the cardboard rectangle, the black tape catching the lamplight in sharp, straight lines. By the time the clock edged past midnight, the rain had softened to a mist, the quiet inside pressing in like a heavy blanket. She drifted off, the flicker of the TV painting faint blue shadows across the room. At 1:12 a.m., she woke. At first, she wasn't sure what had pulled her from sleep. Then she heard it, a faint, deliberate scratching. It came from the box, long, slow drags, like nails or claws tracing the cardboard surface. Then a pause, then another scrape. Claire's breath caught. She told herself it was just the sound of the cardboard shifting in the damp, maybe the contents settling. But it didn't sound random. It sounded like something inside was testing the walls. She sat up slowly, her pulse in her throat. Every rational thought told her to get up, throw the box outside, and lock the door. But she stayed frozen, watching it. The scratching stopped the instant she leaned forward to touch it. She held her breath, waiting. Nothing. Claire carried the box into the laundry room, shut the door, and went back to bed, telling herself it was just her imagination. The next morning was bright, the storm gone. Claire made coffee, standing in the kitchen and staring at the closed laundry room door. She told herself the night's events had been half dream. Still, she called the post office. A woman answered, her voice oddly flat, almost distracted. "No record of that delivery," she said. "No tracking number. No return address? Then it's not in our system." Claire hesitated. "So, it just showed up?" "Sounds like it." The woman hung up before Claire could ask more. Her stomach tightened. Someone had placed it there. She considered tossing it entirely, but a strange, needling curiosity kept her from doing so. The box was barely bigger than a shoebox. What could possibly be inside? The note's warning, "Do not open at night," haunted her thoughts all day. That evening the scratching began earlier, around 11 p.m., just as she was rinsing dishes. This time it was joined by a soft thump, 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 steady and deliberate, as if something inside was knocking. Her heart pounded. She turned on every light in the house, telling herself light made things less ridiculous. Then, against her own better judgment, she fetched a kitchen knife and slit the black tape. The flaps opened with a reluctant tear. Inside, wrapped in thin paper, was a doll. It wasn't cute. Its stitched mouth curved upward in a smile that was just a fraction too wide, the threads uneven. 2 pointed ears poked from a patch of matted black hair. Its eyes were deep, glassy black, so dark they seemed to swallow the light rather than reflect it. And then the smell hit her, sweet but spoiled, like fruit left too long in a sealed drawer. Her skin crawled. Claire dropped the lid back over the box and shoved it aside. She'd deal with it in the morning. Sunlight streamed through the blinds. For a moment, she thought the night before had been some odd dream, until she entered the living room. The box sat open. The doll was gone. Her pulse roared in her ears as she scanned the room. She found it sitting upright on the arm of the couch, its glassy eyes fixed toward the hallway leading to her bedroom. She didn't remember moving it. She didn't remember touching it at all after sealing the box. She stuffed the doll back into the box, wrapped it in 2 thick trash bags, and shoved it into the hall closet. The rest of the day, she forced herself to stay busy. Dishes, laundry, scrolling through her phone. Anything to keep her mind away from the thing in the closet. It wasn't until she went to the bathroom that she noticed something wrong. Her reflection was smiling. Her own lips were pressed together, but in the mirror, her mouth curled upward into that same too wide grin as the doll. Her chest tightened. The grin in the mirror grew wider, showing teeth. Claire stumbled back, slamming the bathroom door. She didn't look again. By the 4th night, she barely slept. She heard movement in the walls, soft padded steps on the floorboards when she knew she was alone. Once she thought she saw a small, hunched shadow slip across the hallway, pointed ears catching the light before vanishing. The worst was the humming, low, tuneless, and constant, as if the house itself was vibrating. The bathroom mirror always smiled now. Sometimes in the far corner of the reflection, she swore she saw the doll's head peeking in. Her thoughts grew fractured. She began forgetting things, whether she'd locked the door, turned off the stove, closed the closet. She decided she would burn it. In the backyard, under a high, thin moon, she tore open the trash bags. The doll lay inside, its stitched smile wider than she remembered. She struck a match. The flame wavered in the damp air. The moment it touched the fabric, the wind rose sharply, whipping her hair into her face. The match went out. A voice whispered behind her, sing-song, childlike. "Return! To sender!" She spun around. No one. When she looked back, the doll was gone. Morning. A knock at the door. A mail carrier stood there holding a box. Same size, same black tape, same yellow note. "Package for Claire W.," he said. She stared at it, her blood running cold. When she looked up to tell him she wouldn't accept it, he was gone. The box sat at her feet. This note read, "You forgot to smile." Her lips twitched.